Homeschool, a novel by Casey Giltner. Chapter 20. Tavia. Hey! Hey, you! Mira stopped in her tracks. The skateboard rolled up beside her and ground to a halt. The girl remained perfectly balanced on top. Hey, she said again. Mira's mind twisted itself up, doing all manner of backflips and cartwheels, deciding how to respond. After far too long a pause, she finally landed on, hey. The girl gave Mira the once-over, her mouth curled with a sardonic little grin. Her hair was black, untended, casually raised in a half side pony. Her nose had been broken before. She smelled like bubblegum and gasoline. I've never seen you before. Where do you go to school? I don't. You don't go to school? My aunt, homeschools me. Oh. The girl was embarrassed on Mira's behalf. Your aunt? Lady with the crazy eyes? Mira nodded. I've heard things about her. What things? Oh, lures strangers into her house, hypnotizes them, prays to Satan, stuff like that. Mira wasn't sure whether she was joking or not. What's your name? The girl asked. Mira. I'm Tavia. Tavia looked like she might hold out a hand to be shaken, but ultimately didn't. Her hands hung awkwardly. Mira was confused. She knew intuitively this was a girl who was not used to feeling awkward. She owned who she was unapologetically, and yet here she was, showing a moment of nerve with Mira. How come you live with your aunt? Tavia asked to fill the awkwardness. Now it was Mira's turn to stand awkwardly, not knowing what to do with her hands. Oh, my mom died. Fuck, Tavia blurted. What about your dad? I never had one. They're overrated, Tavia said with a hint of bitterness. But why does she homeschool you? St. Raphael's wouldn't let me start this semester. I just moved here. Why not go to public school then? Like a normal person. I think she's worried public school will turn me into a godless heathen or something. According to my grandma, I already am one. We can be godless heathens together, Tavia said with a shit-eating grin that Mira couldn't help but match. What's homeschool like? It's like... Mira thought for a moment. There were so many ways to answer a question like that. Before she knew it, it was pouring out of her. You're the only student, and you have to answer every question, and you live with the teacher and eat with her, and your door doesn't have a lock, and she can hear you go to the bathroom, and she's always watching you, and her weird friends are always around, and they're always watching. The distant dong of the chapel bell brought her back to her senses. She went quiet and stayed that way. Oof, Tavia lamented. Mira hung her head, afraid she'd said too much, but Tavia let her off the hook. You must be a saint. I couldn't handle that shit. Just me and my mom in a room alone every day? I'd end up killing her. Unless she killed me first. Mira laughed. Tavia smirked, pleased to get a laugh from her. The church bell rang again, this time breaking through Mira's subconscious. I need to get back, Mira said urgently. It's not even dark yet. Mira shrugged and started walking. Tavia rolled down the street with her. I only had 20 minutes. 20 minutes? What are you, a fucking prisoner? Kinda feels like it, Mira admitted. As soon as she said it, she realized it was largely true. She had not thought of her new situation in such dire circumstances until now, when she was confronted with the alternative. Does she let you eat? Shit? Watch TV? Tavia asked. Mira shook her head glumly. No TV? Fucking witch. That's it. We're gonna have to bump her off. Poison her. Make it look like a suicide. What? How else are we gonna get you to public school? Tavia gave her a devilish grin. Mira couldn't help but reciprocate once again. What's your Insta? She said, whipping out her phone. Mira looked at her blankly. You on TikTok? Snap? Shit, Facebook? Do you have a phone number? I've never had a phone. You've never had a phone? Tavia's jaw was on the ground, her eyes practically rolling out of her head. I don't know, I never really wanted one, Mira said. Off the grid. All right, I respect that. Tavia sighed. You're not like the rest of them, are you? Mira stayed quiet, not sure whether it was a compliment. See you around, Mira. Keep your eye out for a good poison. And just like that, Tavia skated away. Mira watched her go, windswept. It was the first interaction she'd had with someone her own age since the funeral. And really, it was unlike any interaction she'd ever had. It was a shockwave, a bolt of lightning, straight through her. She gets it, the little voice in her head said. She gets me, Mira thought. But the rush of blood to her head soon subsided. Crestfallen, she realized she was standing outside Vivian's house. A shadow lurked behind the stained glass front window. Chapter 21. People Like That. When Mira opened the door, she was enveloped in a cloud of cigarette smoke. She coughed and waved it away. Vivian was sitting next to the fire, a cigarette in one hand, scribbling furiously in her red notebook with the other. Mira knew right away it wasn't good. Vivian usually didn't smoke in the house. Mira had witnessed her on multiple occasions out back, sneaking a smoke after Mira had gone to bed, but she had done her utmost to make it seem as though she had kicked the habit. Mira hadn't even caught a whiff of stale tobacco on her clothing or breath. "You're late," she stubbed out her cigarette and looked up. "Who was that you were talking to just now?" There was venom in her tone. Tavia? And what did Tavia want? Vivian stood and anxiously lit yet another cigarette. Had she been chain-smoking from the moment Mira left the house? Well? I don't know, she just started talking to me. She must have wanted something. Did I do something wrong? Mira asked. She didn't understand what was happening. Why was her aunt acting like this? Vivian stepped a little too close for comfort. People always want something, Mira. It's important to know that, especially for you. We were just talking. Listen to me, Vivian interrupted. She was nearly bursting, barely able to contain herself, blinded by her passion. You are capable of achieving great things, but not if you allow people like her to distract you. Mira had never seen this side of her aunt. She wanted to respond. She wanted to clap back and fight. Just what was so damn wrong with talking to a girl her own age, even if she was a stranger? But there was a certain mania in Vivian's eyes. This frantic, neurotic side had come out of nowhere. Mira found her voice incapable in that moment of exiting her body. It's probably best if you don't speak to her again, Vivian concluded. What? Really? Mira was shocked. It was so extreme. Really? Now up to your room, Vivian ordered. What about dinner? Dinner was at 6. You were not here at 6. It's only 6:05, Mira complained, pointing at the grandfather clock in the hall. I'm sorry if I seem harsh, but without my sister here, it's my responsibility to make sure you stay on track. Mira stared at her, jaw hanging open in outrage. But I'm starving. I know a man who once went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights without food or drink. I think you can survive one night. There was little to distract Mira from the grumbling in her stomach. Confined to her room, with no TV, no phone, no internet, no books, and none of her possessions, Mira was at a loss for what to do to pass the time. You didn't do anything wrong, the little voice in her head said. Mira knew something was wrong with her aunt, but she didn't know what. Why was she treating her like this? There was something amiss, something deep. Why did it feel so different than life with her mother? They were sisters, after all. How different could they really be? Where was her mother's empathy, her soul, her love? Vivian cared about Mira, she knew that, but it was a cold caring, a rote and functional care. It wasn't warm. It didn't feel like love. What did Mira really even know about her aunt? She was beginning to realize she didn't know this woman at all. Her memories of her childhood were no help. They were images, mere flashes of people and places and feelings. She'd been 5 when her mother had moved them to Colorado. What information was she missing? What did she not remember? What did she not know? All of it had died with her mother. Her mother. The emotions came flooding back all of a sudden. She sunk back against the wall and waited for the pain to pass by, running her mother's necklace through her hands. She began to zone out, staring deep into the facets of the crystal, thinking about the life she'd lost. Just then, something dripped onto the necklace. She dabbed a finger at it. It left a reddish smudge. It was blood. What the hell? Mira checked her face for a nosebleed, but there was nothing there. Another drop came down, this time onto her bed. Her eyes tracked up to the massive crucifix on the wall over her bed. The painted wounds of Jesus on the cross looked real enough to be wet. In fact, they were. Real blood was dripping its way down the torso, arms, and legs, right down the wall. Mira's eyes widened with realization. She jumped back from her bed and rounded on Jesus, putting up her fists like she was about to be attacked. But in an instant, the blood was gone. The crucifix and Jesus himself were dry once more. Certain it really was dry, though not certain she wasn't seeing things, she approached the crucifix. She hesitated before placing her hands on it with great caution, half expecting Jesus to come to life and scream bloody murder, but nothing happened. It was real enough, solid enough. She tried to pull it off the wall, but it was stuck firm. She jostled it with her shoulder, pounding it out of place before hoisting it off the wall. The weight of it nearly toppled her over. It swayed unsteadily, back and forth. She let it tip, then drove it down into her closet, shoving it as far back as it would fit, before slamming the door shut. That night, for the first time since the accident, when her eyes finally flickered shut, she didn't dream about her mother or the dying sheep she had failed to put out of its misery. For the first time, she dreamt about her aunt. Chapter 22. Tenets. Mira slept more than she had in weeks. When she woke, by her own accord for once, rather than to the usual alarm clock of Vivian bursting through the door, the dreams lingered in her mind for a moment, but as soon as she tried to focus in on them, they evaporated like smoke. Considering how the night before had ended, she felt rather well rested, and for the first time in a while, hopeful for the day ahead. Her clock told her it was already 7 o'clock. She was usually abruptly woken at 6. The extra hour must have accounted for the pleasant way she was feeling. She found her aunt already awake downstairs. She was leaning dramatically over the kitchen table, scratching away with a piece of charcoal, drawing with manic intensity on a piece of canvas that covered the entire width of the table. So here was the answer to her extra hour of sleep. "What are you drawing?" Mira asked. Her aunt didn't respond. She seemed so possessed with artistic fervor, like her mind and body had been overtaken by compulsion, that she hadn't heard. Mira repeated the question. Vivian looked up, startled to find her niece, and from the looks of it, surprised to find the sun had risen. In one swift motion, she rolled up her canvas and swept the table clear before Mira could see what was on it. "Good morning," Aunt Vivian said brightly, still not answering the question, reasserting her composure in the blink of an eye. Though, speaking of eyes, like Mira, she had bags around hers. Her cheeks and forehead were blackened with soot. Mira's stomach rumbled. "Is there anything to eat?" "I'll make you something. Take a seat." Vivian tucked the canvas under her arm and went to the kitchen, where she opened the refrigerator, her head disappearing inside. Mira sat at the now empty table. "My stuff still isn't here," she noted, testing the waters of her aunt's mood. Was there a mutual understanding to move past the unpleasantness of the previous day, or would she hold the disagreement against her? "I haven't heard anything new," Vivian called from within the icebox. "I'll call the movers again today." When she reappeared in the dining room, it was without the canvas. She set a glass of milk and a plate containing 2 hard-boiled eggs and 3 cold slices of bacon in front of Mira. "Eat up. We have a very important lesson today." Mira eyed the food warily. "What?" her aunt preempted, spying the disdain in Mira's eyes. "This isn't vegan," Mira said, careful not to let her tone waver into anger. "Well," Vivian sighed, though a slight smirk appeared on the edge of her mouth for the briefest of moments. "Not everything can be vegan all the time." "I can't eat this." "You don't have to eat anything, but this is all we have." She slid the plate closer to Mira. Mira folded her arms, deeply resentful. On cue, her stomach rumbled. It had been 18, maybe 20 hours since she'd had any food. The hopefulness the morning had begun with was already gone, not even 10 minutes past. What's the worst that could happen? Begrudgingly, she picked up a slice of bacon, closed her eyes, and took a bite. By the time school rolled around, Mira felt awful. Whatever strength Mira had gained from a decent night's sleep had been lost to the gut-churning monstrosity roiling its way through her insides. Vivian had written a new schedule on the blackboard. History had been erased and replaced with an additional religious studies, confirming Mira's suspicion and doubling down on her nausea. As class began, Vivian handed Mira a pamphlet. It was emblazoned with a diamond crucifix emblem and titled in big, bold Gothic letters, "Tenets of the Tetrads." Mira's frown grew into a sneer. "What is this?" "You know what the 10 Commandments are?" "I mean, yeah." Sort of. Well, these are ours. Vivian beamed, obviously proud of her work. Though we have 12, not 10. Okay, but what are they? These tenets are what I live my life by, what my church lives by. Crafting these tenets is the most important thing I have done with my life, other than raising you, now, that is. They have the power to transform humanity. Is this about your prediction? Mira questioned. Vivian visibly cringed, but when she spoke, managed to maintain a measured tone. The prophecy is not a prediction. It is not a bet. It is not a forecast or a mathematical probability. It will come true, and it will come true much sooner than you or anyone else realizes. Vivian smiled. It was a smile beyond simple devotion, beyond simple belief. It was the reassured smile only a true believer could offer, an evangelist, a fanatic. Mira stayed quiet. The layers were peeling back on our aunt, and she didn't like what she saw. Now, Vivian said, moving on with the lesson, this pamphlet will provide you more than enough explanation of the tenets and their purpose. I want you to read it, cover to cover, and answer the questions on the board. 1 page per question. That's 4 paragraphs at least. Understood? You may begin. Mira sighed and turned to the first page of the pamphlet. There was a title, followed by a lengthy essay explaining and exploring the tenet in agonizing detail. Tenet 1. There is only one true God. She made it 2 sentences into the essay before her stomach gave another violent rumble. She shifted her weight uncomfortably and glanced up. Vivian was studying her from behind her desk, watching her every move, every twitch of her muscle. Mira looked back down and flipped ahead in the pamphlet. Tenet 2. God sent his only son to save humanity. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Mira stole another glance up. Vivian was still staring at her, but now she had her pencil in hand, not trying to hide the fact that she was obviously sketching a portrait of Mira into her red leather-bound notebook. The answers are in that pamphlet, Mira, not up here. Mira tried to concentrate, but her stomach wouldn't quit. The rumbling was now constant, growing to an alarming fever pitch. She flipped to another tenet. Tenet 3. God sent his only... She never finished reading Tenet 3. A violent rejection rose up from within her. She felt herself launching forward, her head snapping back, jaw thrusting open as she doubled over, puking across the desk. Vivian recoiled and leapt to her feet. The vomit projectiled from Mira, its spray ricocheting off the desk and across the room. Vivian bounded across the room, dodging the stream in a desperate attempt to save the pamphlet. She stuck her hands right through the fountain spewing from Mira's mouth. But it was too late. The pamphlet was already soaked. A slimy, toxic, greenish-yellow mass. She lifted it at the edge. It crumbled at her touch, disintegrating like acid through skin. At last, the vomit ceased. Mira wiped her mouth. She was stunned by the violence of the act. She was gutted, emptied out. Her throat burned of stomach acid. Her mouth tasted of disease and rot. I'm sorry, Aunt Vivian, she said meekly. Vivian stared wide-eyed at the mess, mortified. She held the last few shards of her precious tenets carefully in her hands like newborn children. But seeing it was hopeless, she dropped the pieces of pamphlet into the spew. They, too, disintegrated. Just go clean yourself up, she said as she shook the sick from her hands. I'll take care of this toxic mess. Mira couldn't help but smirk a bit as she left. The only thing toxic here are those tenets. Chapter 23. Blade, Bike, and Board. Mira stood at her window. She stared unhappily at the sunny day the rest of the neighborhood was experiencing. As before, she was locked in, a prisoner. Not physically, but her aunt had refused and prevented any effort on Mira's part to leave the house. The room had grown stuffy in the unseasonal heat. Her head was a sweltering fog. She could no longer maintain the pretext of studying or doing her homework. She wanted to be anywhere but here. You don't have to stay, the little voice in her head murmured, cutting through the fog. She didn't need further prompting. What was actually keeping her here? Nothing, really. Only her own good nature. Only her dedication to respecting her aunt's wishes. But there was no reason in those wishes. Her aunt's rules had grown tighter and more restrictive until they were, in fact, wildly unreasonable. So why was she still honoring them? She didn't want to get in trouble. That was the truth of it. But what could her aunt do if Mira left the house? Ground her? She already had no free time. She already had a seemingly infinite list of chores. She had no TV or internet or social life. What exactly was she risking besides potentially sacrificing the vision her aunt had of her as a good kid? I'm not a kid. I'm 14, and I'm not her kid, Mira thought. She was decided. But how to go about it? Should she walk out the front door in open defiance? She wasn't sure she was up for the confrontation, but thankfully, a better idea came to mind. Softly as she could, Mira slid the window lock open. She whispered a word of thanks to the cosmos that there was no screen to deal with. She put both hands against the window glass and delicately pushed it up. It squealed lightly. The frame was old and gritty, wedged too tightly after years of moisture bloating the wood. Mira stopped and listened for movement down below. Did her aunt hear the window? But there was silence from the stairwell. She pushed the window the remaining 12 inches. She leaned out, judging how far it was, looking for a way to climb down. There were only bad options, but the drop wasn't unreasonable. In a pinch, she could drop. She climbed through carefully, perching for a moment on the windowsill, then planting her feet delicately on the sliver of slanted roof beneath her window. She edged toward the corner, her grip tenuous. Once there, she hugged the drain pipe and lowered her body down until her feet connected with the trestle that rose up along the garden. It felt stable enough. She put some weight on it. It seemed to hold her just fine. She felt for the next row down the trestle. Her foot slipped. She lost her grip and plummeted the rest of the way. The fall was about 9 feet. She landed in the garden, not, thankfully, on top of the pumpkins, but rather on the much softer sod that had recently been picked clean of tomatoes and zucchinis. Also, by some act of God, she had narrowly missed the spike atop the decorative iron gate at the garden's entrance. She rolled over with a pained grimace. A shadow appeared behind the stained glass window that overlooked the garden. Mira shut up and stayed low, hoping, praying that the shadow would go away. A distorted face appeared, pressing against the glass, one eye straining to see through a red pane, the other a white pane, both unblinking, both Vivian's. Mira dared not move. She dared not breathe. She dared only pray her aunt go away. After what seemed like an hour, Vivian gave up. Her discolored eyes blinked, and the shadow moved away from the window. Mira didn't hesitate. She took her opportunity and crept out of the garden. Mira sat on the swing set, but she wasn't swinging. Her eyes were closed, simply soaking in the sun like a long-lost friend. God, how she missed the outdoors. Her daily bike rides with her mother, walking, hiking, the outdoor lessons at experiences. Heck, she even missed gardening, an activity her mom had been trying in vain to get Mira to enjoy for the past couple planting seasons. She heard wheels grinding on pavement, increasing in volume. Her heart beat faster. Look alive, Mira! Mira opened her eyes as Tavia rolled up next to her on her skateboard. She angled the board and skid to a stop. In one smooth motion, she hopped off, popped the board up to herself, and tucked it under her arm. It was a well-worn board, the underside a swirl of black smoke and white skulls. Mira averted her eyes. I'm not allowed to talk to you. Tavia laughed. It was dry and wispy and seemed to exist outside space and time. Frankly, Mira found it adorable and a bit intoxicating. It drew you in, inviting you to a private joke only you and her knew about. Your crazy aunt say that? Who else? So, you want me to leave you alone? Now Mira looked at her. Tavia's dark, almost black eyes sparkled mischievously. There was a hint of a grin, teasing her. No, Mira admitted, unable to prevent herself from blushing. That a girl, Tavia said. Her hint blossomed into a full smirk now. Mira couldn't help but let one creep onto her face as well. Tavia indicated the skate park. Come on, let's hit the bunker. She threw down her board and rolled smoothly over to the concrete jungle. More than a dozen others already populated it. Most of them were boys, as well as what looked like a couple of full-grown men, riding, skating, or even just shooting the shit. They all looked cool. Or at least, cooler than Mira. Mira followed, nervous as all hell. She hesitated at the gate, waiting until she was certain no one was looking in her direction. When she could hesitate no more, she followed Tavia in. Every head turned her way. Every eye rose up and down her body and then doubled back for another go. Mira dropped her eyes to the pavement and powered past. Tavia had stopped next to 3 teenage boys hanging atop a quarter pipe. Their eyes found Mira as she walked over and flared instantly with disdain. Guys, this is Mira. She's new in the neighborhood. Mira, this is Leo, JJ, and Truck. She ran down the lineup. Leo had a skateboard and a very unfortunate bowl cut. JJ had a bike and a fixed look of disbelief. Truck eased back and forth on rollerblades, his face buried in his phone. He seemed to be there for the vibes alone. You skate? Leo asked. You blade? JJ followed up. I bike, Mira answered, indicating the contraption beneath JJ. The disbelief on his face doubled down. You bike? In that? He pointed derisively at the old black and white school uniform of Vivian that Mira still unfortunately had on. Against all odds, she had found this particular garment the least restrictive. The sleeves at least rolled up and stayed up. She had worn it 3 times this week. Mira brought her arms in front of her, making a hopeless attempt at covering up some bit of the clothing. Mira knew intuitively that these boys were not worth her time. There was something about being male and 14 that just made you a loathsome human being. They were awkward and vain, obvious and obtuse. She could tell Leo was the type who was learning to be mean and proud of it. She could tell that JJ would only run his mouth more and more until someone finally shut him up. She could tell Truck was the most emotionally stunted of all of them and likely to grow up hating women. She could tell they all had a home life, maybe not as difficult as hers, but certainly nothing to write home about. And yet, she stayed, because of Tavia. To Mira's great surprise, Tavia leapt to her defense. Shut the fuck up, JJ, Tavia spat. What? She's the one who showed up in a corset or some shit. 'Cause you dress so cool? The 2000s called They Want Their Jorts Back. Real fucking original. JJ flicked her off and biked away. Go draw another Sharpie tattoo on your dick, she shouted after him before returning to the other 2. Her aunt's psycho, makes her wear weird shit. She's cool. You sure about that? Leo poked. I said she's cool. Don't be a dick. Wait, Leo mumbled, something dawning on his otherwise thick skull. I know her. Isn't her aunt that cult lady? Yeah, she came around my house trying to get my parents to join. Freaked my mom the fuck out. Her aunt's not in a cult. Look, I'm just telling you what happened. Her aunt's crazy. I said her aunt's not in a cult, Tavia screamed, getting right in his face. Some of the other faces in the park looked their way. Okay, Leo relented and skated away, leaving only Truck, face still buried in his phone. Eventually he looked up, noticed the others had left, and quickly skated away without saying anything. Now it was just the 2 of them, which was fine with Mira, though plenty of eyes were still on them. Tavia said something to her. Mira didn't hear it. The word cult had sent Mira's brain spinning. Cult. The tetrads. Cult. Vivian. Her stomach sank. They weren't a cult, right? She asked herself every way she could think to ask it. But now that the idea had been incepted in her mind, she couldn't dash it. Hello? Earth to Mira. Your aunt's not in a cult, right? Tavia waved her hands in front of Mira's face. Mira snapped out of it. No, she's just super religious, and what? Mira hesitated, not wanting to admit her concerns. And they do go to this weird church. How weird. It's in a barn. Tavia suddenly realized they were no longer joking around. Her heavily mascaraed eyes blinked rapidly, processing this turn of events. She lowered her voice. Shit. Is that bad? It can't be good. The barn, it's just temporary, Mira claimed, trying to reassure herself. Have they done weird rituals to you? Weird how? I don't know, like, asked you to drink anything? No. Whatever you do, don't drink anything they give you, especially if they tell you it's Kool-Aid. Why? What's in the Kool-Aid? Drugs? Poison? Goat blood? It's never just Kool-Aid. Mira had a million follow-up questions, but just then she heard the distant ringing of the chapel bells. 6 o'clock. Shit. She needed to get home. Right away. She said a hurried goodbye and raced out of the skate park as Tavia called after her. Remember, don't fucking drink the Kool-Aid! Had she been gone too long? Had Vivian gone up to her room? Had she noticed Mira was gone? There was no time to consider it. She just had to get back. Chapter 24. An Olive Branch. Mira pushed the food around her plate. Peas, carrots, and corn. All three turned to mush beneath her fork, clearly nothing more than frozen bulk goods defrosted in a microwave. Meanwhile, Vivian sat across from her with a full pot roast, as if she had been expecting dinner guests that never materialized. Mira wondered whether it was meant to tempt or taunt her. Vivian always ate neatly, an easy tell betraying an upbringing built around manners above all else. But tonight the pot roast was tough and stringy. Mira found herself staring at her aunt's mouth as she chewed, grinding the meat down. She was careful never to open her mouth while she chewed, and yet the face she had to make to maintain her composure against this particularly grisly meat was off-putting at best, disgusting at worst. Try as she might, Mira could not look away. It had been a very close call. Getting back in the house had been no easy task. She had not fully considered her path back inside. The garden trestle had proven as unstable on the way up as on the way down. She made a mental note to reinforce it as part of her chores later on so she might sneak out more easily in the future. Mira had pulled herself up onto the roof, slid open the window, and climbed through. She stepped quietly onto the floor, avoiding what she knew were the most problematic floorboards, already thinking about what an altogether successful jailbreak it had been. But she had failed in the final moment. She had let go of the window, not thinking, and it had fallen shut with a loud thud. Mira froze. She held still, listening. She heard the footsteps from down below, the sharp, striking rap of Vivian's distinctive heels on the stairs and heading this way. Mira dove for her bed. She threw herself down on her stomach, opened a textbook, and laid her head on it, pretending to have fallen asleep studying. She waited. The distinctive squeak of the doorknob alerted her to Vivian's arrival. The rapping of her heels paused as she stood, presumably in the threshold, looking in on her sleeping niece. Mira dared not move a muscle. But was she too rigid? Was it clear she was feigning sleep? Should she allow for the subtle rise and fall of her chest? She started breathing, but she was still out of breath from the climb. Could her aunt tell from the staccato rhythm of her lungs that this was all bullshit? Mira took the chance and opened one eye halfway. She could see Vivian's shadow on the wall. She thought she could tell that Vivian was looking at the window, then at the spilt textbook on the floor. Why look at the window, if not with suspicion? She was putting the pieces together. Mira was done for. Her aunt knew. She always knew. She had proven that from their first meeting. But at that moment, Vivian had cleared her throat. A light, almost too delicate, "Hem." Mira let her eyes flutter open on the second throat clearing. "Mira? Mira, honey? Sorry to wake you, but it's dinner time." At a minimum, Vivian was going through the motions of honoring Mira's charade. "You must have dozed off." Mira had yawned, really selling it, internally relieved. I guess so." She had smiled, and so had Vivian. And as dinner had progressed, with no signs having materialized that Vivian was play-acting, Mira had started to let her guard down. Mira pulled her eyes away from Vivian's incessant chewing and ventured a bite of her own meal. It was straight mush, with no taste or flavor, but she swallowed. Her stomach gave a violent rumble. Perhaps eating nothing was better than eating this. As if reading her mind, Vivian spoke. "How's your dinner?" "Perfectly splendid," Mira replied, a note too chipper. "You should try the pot roast. I spend so much time cooking for you, it's a shame not to at least try it." Mira tried to read Vivian's face. Was there ill intent there? Was she toying with Mira? Mira wasn't altogether unsure if her aunt knew she had snuck out and was going to slowly torture Mira with the information. She knows nothing. Of course she doesn't, Mira thought. She simply had a guilty conscience. Guilt, that powerful yet simple emotion, dwelled upon and harped on, especially in her aunt's lessons. What was right, what was proper, what you should do and what you shouldn't, how you should feel when you did wrong, the shame you should feel always, even when you hadn't done wrong. A guilty conscience was a sin in itself. Mira didn't understand any of it, but here she was, feeling it now. Why did she feel it so intensely? Why now? It was the accident. Of course. That's what had unlocked her shame, her guilt. It wasn't sneaking out she felt guilty about, it was her mother. It was all just misplaced shame from distracting her. You have nothing to feel guilty about. It's not the act itself that matters, it's the failing to seek forgiveness that's the true sin, her aunt had said in one particularly pointed lesson. Failing to seek forgiveness. From who? From Vivian? What had she done to earn that? Why did Mira even care so much? Her aunt was clearly in the wrong. So why was Mira beating herself up? Mira looked up, realizing she hadn't answered. I don't like pot roast. How can you even eat that? I eat it because it's delicious and healthy and good for you. Is it? Is it what? Is it really healthy? Mira elaborated, daring further risk of her aunt's wrath. Like, what's actually healthy about meat? There's protein. Vegetables have protein too. I'm not going to get in a debate about the nutritional facets of pot roast, Vivian caught herself. People have been eating it for a long, long time and living long and rich lives. Just because people have been doing something for a long time doesn't make it right. Vivian stared daggers at her. Mira met her gaze equally. How was this woman her mother's sister? How had they come from the same parents? How had they grown up in the same house? What sort of home had it been to produce someone so iron-willed? How had her mother rejected everything that was so obviously indoctrinated at Vivian's core? As they stared at each other like strangers, they were at an impasse. Something like a pale passed across Vivian's face, and after it did, her eyes had softened. She sighed. You're right. Of course. Mira was too shocked to respond. Vivian pushed her plate away from her and stood. I have something for you. Vivian disappeared to the hallway. A full minute passed, during which all manner of crazed thoughts passed through Mira's brain. When she returned, she was carrying a large parcel wrapped in thick brown shipping paper. She handed it to Mira. Go ahead, Vivian seemed to dare her. Open it. Mira braced herself and tore open the parcel. But it was nothing overtly devious or threatening. It was filled with clothing. New clothing, she could tell, since the tags were still on. The sort of off-brand surplus clothing one would find in a bin beneath a 70% off sign. Every piece of it was plain, not a stripe or clash of color to be found. Every bit screamed of modesty. The most extreme piece was a deep olive green dress, really more like brown, but its daring color was offset by the extra long cuffs and jaw-high turtleneck. I think we have to face facts, Vivian began. Those movers were obviously not good at their jobs. I know it's impossible to replace the things you lost, but we'll try, one piece at a time, as my budget allows. I hope you like them. Mira tried to look on the bright side. At least they were not hand-me-downs. This was an olive branch. That was clear. Perhaps Vivian was feeling many of the same things about Mira that Mira had been feeling about her. The feeling of living with a stranger, the awkwardness of having your life upended unexpectedly. Perhaps she really was just trying her best. Maybe Mira was reading into things a bit too much. Vivian came around the table and gave Mira a hug. It was a surprise at first. Mira started out rigid, but the hug lingered, and she felt herself go slack. I'm sorry I've been short with you. I see now the bacon was a mistake. It won't happen again. I'm still adjusting to this parenting thing. Mira smiled and mumbled a quiet, humble, thank you. Later, alone in her room, Mira shoved the entire parcel indiscriminately into the wardrobe containing her aunt's old clothing. That was right where they belonged. This was no olive branch, Mira had determined. This was just a blatant effort to placate her. Yet another misguided effort to win her over. More proof her aunt didn't know her at all. She'd never really cared much about clothes, at least not until hers were taken away and these retreads were forced on her. But these were her things they were talking about. They were irreplaceable. Certainly not by a single trip to the sale rack at JCPenney or Kohl's, and certainly not with her aunt's hideous taste in clothing. But it wasn't just the clothes. She missed her books, her movies, her pictures, her scrapbooks, her stuffies. Mr. Mojo Monkey, Twinkle Toes, Benny the Bengal, and Elio the Elephant, her bed, the paintings her mother had made, her diary. She could just picture the stupid moving company men now reading it back and having a good laugh at her expense. She missed everything. Chapter 25. A Blessing. Time did not fly. It crawled. The days passed with a slowness verging on the decadent. Mira had not chanced another escapade outside. Some mixture of guilt and fear held her back. She told herself she would get her aunt to lower her guard first before she took the chance. But between her rigorous homeschool lessons, her daily child labor, her chores, the barn church on Sunday, and random visits from Vivian's fellow congregants during which Mira was made to sit and listen until they finally left, she always had to put up with an unusual amount of stares and awkwardness. There was hardly a window of time decent enough to even consider a jailbreak, much less the mental bandwidth to pull it off. It seemed Vivian had a standing window for visitors, as if she maintained a schedule and took appointments. Round about 3 in the afternoon, tea time as it began to be called, a tetrad congregant, or 2 or 3, would show up at the door unannounced. Vivian would usher them in with great ceremony and call upon Mira to serve. It was in this way that she began to put more names to the many faces she saw each Sunday, or out and about in the neighborhood. In addition to the usual retinue of Mrs. Masterani, who came nearly every day, the Rutherfords and Deacon Sandy, whose presence was always tense and filled with innuendo, there was Mr. Derrickson, the town orthodontist, who told Mira she had a wicked overbite and offered her discounted braces. There was Mrs. Jacobs, who did something with books or numbers. There were the twins, Mike and Max, the next youngest members besides Mira at a spry 32. They had been missionaries of some sort and were recently returned after a decade away. There was old Lady Bryans, a creaking widow with no teeth who sat and didn't say a word for a full hour. These visits ensured that the 30 minutes in her schedule that had once been free now magically evaporated nearly every day. If there was no time, Vivian must have reason, well, then Mira couldn't ask to leave. Mira's mind was on a precipice, lingering on the edge of sanity. She began to realize her only hope would be after hours. She'd need to save up enough strength to sneak out only after she was certain Vivian was sleeping soundly. She planned it out 3 days in advance. But the night before, she slept worse than ever. And on the day of, she did not relish the sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She took to her chapel work with extra verve, utilizing the welcome distraction. Slowly but surely, the chapel was starting to look functional. What was once rotting and deteriorating had regained a hint of long-forgotten beauty. At the moment, Mira was attacking the brass tabernacle, scrubbing and polishing it with all the youthful energy she yearned to expel outside. She was already on day 2 of this particular task, having purposefully left herself less than half of the tabernacle for the following day so as to finish early. The brass was faded, but it had regained its golden shine in a few spots. She went over the plan in her head. The play acting tired at dinner, which wasn't much of a stretch, the fake bedtime routine, the exit route, the re-entrance, she drilled it down to the minute. Other than the paintings and a statue of Mary, she was usually alone in here, so she was startled when the door burst open and Vivian swept in unannounced. Mira stopped polishing the tabernacle and wiped the sweat from her brow. Vivian said nothing, but began walking the edge of the chapel, inspecting Mira's work on a granular level. Mira dropped down into the front pew, that had been recently sanded and stained, and watched the inspection. She couldn't help but wonder whether Vivian could read her thoughts. Did she know what Mira was planning? How? Mira dismissed the idea. Of course Vivian couldn't know. Vivian ran a hand across the fresh paint on the wall. She gazed at the refurbished paintings, the Stations of the Cross, Jesus taking up the cross, Jesus falling, Simon helping Jesus carry the cross, Jesus being nailed to the cross, beaming with pride at all of it. "You've made great progress." "Thanks," Mira mumbled. "I believe it's time." "Time for what?" Vivian looked at her and smiled from ear to ear. "A blessing." The tetrads began arriving at sundown. To Mira's eye, the chapel was in no way finished. The roof was still in miserable shape. Mira found it was often damp inside after a rainy night. The foundation was suspect. Many signs of age were permanent, despite how hard Mira scrubbed or scraped or sanded, but the fresh coats of paint and varnish were enough for Vivian, and there was a certain shine to the place now. Mira watched the gathering swell from her bedroom window. It seemed the whole congregation was here. They didn't come to the door. They lingered outside in the space between the house and the chapel, where they staked a series of candlelit lanterns to light the pathway. There would be no sneaking out tonight. Her well-orchestrated plan was ruined before it could start in earnest. When the crowd had grown to capacity, Vivian waved to her to come down. Vivian had not elaborated on what the blessing would entail, and Mira was too scared to ask. It seemed to start just as Mira walked outside. The tetrads were edging toward the chapel proper. Mira weaved her way through, eventually spotting Vivian at the front. She beckoned Mira to her side. Mira recognized all the new faces, as well as the mainstays. The fervent-faced Mrs. Mastroianni was closest, the eager Rutherfords not far behind, the others from that first dinner, even more from the barn church, and some from tea time. Each congregant now held either a lantern or a large palm leaf. "What is this?" Mira couldn't help but ask. "It's a sort of ritual, a blessing of the chapel, to christen all your hard work." Just then, the crowd parted. Deacon Sandy appeared in his red priest robe, carrying a ceremonial brass incense holder. He swung the incense back and forth. Fumes rose like spirits into the night. The crowd formed a line, 2 by 2, and a procession began around the grounds of the chapel. The deacon led the way, Mira and Vivian directly behind him. He hummed a low hymn. The song trickled its way back through the crowd until the entire congregation had joined in. There were no words, but they all knew the tune. They circled once, twice, around the chapel. The incense hung in the air. The congregants fanned the fumes with their palm leaves up toward the bell tower. The procession stopped at the front steps of the chapel. A small statue, an idol carved of wood, was waiting for them on the top step. It was not clear to Mira what the idol was. It was roughly carved, almost pagan in its boldness, though unmistakably Catholic in its influence. It was a holy person, but there was no face, as though whoever had carved it had stopped short of finishing. Torches then appeared from somewhere in the crowd. Mr. Rutherford stepped forward and handed one to Vivian. Mrs. Rutherford handed the other to Mira with a meaningful smile. Vivian held her torch to one side of the idol and indicated for Mira to do the same. Aware of the eyes on her, of everyone watching her, Mira followed suit, touching her torch to the other side of the idol. It didn't hesitate to ignite. Flames overwhelmed it. The congregation pushed closer, their faces illuminated like ghouls as they fanned the flames with the palm leaves. In mere seconds, the idol was reduced to ash. That had to be it, right? Mira thought. The ritual was done, and now she could get away, back to the safety of her room. But there was no exhale of finality from the crowd. In fact, they brimmed with anticipation. No sooner had the thought exited her that the deacon revealed a mammoth brass goblet. He held it high, with both hands full, and recited a prayer that Mira barely heard, finishing with their usual call and response, "May his prophecy be fulfilled! We will share in the fruits of his works!" Before Mira could process what was happening, the goblet was being passed through the crowd. Each congregant was taking a penitent sip and passing it along to the next. "This is not okay." It reached Mira. Tavia's words flashed big and loud in her mind. "Goat's blood! Goat's blood! Goat's blood!" But what could she do? She looked up at Vivian. "Please no. Please don't make me drink it," her eyes begged her aunt. But Vivian was already guiding the goblet to Mira's mouth. In the darkness, Mira couldn't make out the contents. She put her lips to the cold brass cup and took the smallest of sips. It was thick, salty, bitter. She swallowed it down quick. It tasted like almonds, she realized belatedly. Vivian stared meaningfully at Mira and raised her hand. Held 4 fingers to her heart. Mira knew what she wanted. She raised her own hand and mimicked Vivian's. 4 fingers held tight to her heart. Then together, they both went tap, tap. Vivian smiled. No. Beamed. She was bursting with pride, like they just shared some father-son game of catch for the first time. Mira shrunk into herself. She wanted to puke. What had she just done? She wanted nothing more than to run away, to get out of here, away from everyone, all these people. She didn't like these people. She didn't like this place. but her aunt's hand remained permanently affixed to her shoulder. She wasn't going back to her room. She wasn't sneaking out tonight. She wasn't going anywhere. She didn't remember the rest of the ritual. Chapter 26. Paralyzed. Mira woke in a full panic. Had she been dreaming? She couldn't remember. A tsunami of thoughts flooded her brain as consciousness returned, and whatever place it had been, her mind could not conjure it anew. The house was too quiet, too dark. She couldn't see beyond the edge of her bed. It dropped off into shadow, a chasm behind which lay an infinite nothing. From within that black, there was a murmur somewhere beyond where the foot of her bed should be. She sat up. Well, she attempted to, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed. From head to toe, Mira could feel nothing, move nothing. She was helpless. Voices trickled through the fog. Her eyes tracked down her legs. A crowd of people in red satin robes now stood at the foot of her bed where the chasm had been. They all wore hoods with their features obscured, small black voids where their faces should be. Mira's panic doubled, then tripled. Her eyes raced around their sockets, desperate to break from her bonds. Sweat beaded instantly on her forehead. The robed person at the forefront outstretched their hands, waving an incense holder over Mira's paralyzed body. The others crowded close. They appeared to sway as one, an otherworldly hum groaning out of them. The incense holder. As soon as her mind keyed in on it, his face materialized, clear as day within the red satin robe looming over her. Deacon Sandy. His features were nothing like she had ever seen. His eyes bulged with fanatic intensity. He spoke in some unknown language, his voice booming, echoing around and around and around the room and right down into her soul. Servo nobis, Dominus Deus, nos est sumus, nos sumus electi, nos bonum, nos deducer ad inferos. Mira clamped her eyes shut. The one part of herself she could still control. It was a dream. It was all a dream. It was just a dream. This wasn't happening. This wasn't happening. Her mind was playing tricks on her. It was just a dream. A nightmare. Just a stupid little nightmare. Everything was fine. Nothing is fine. Everything was okay. Nothing is okay. Everything will be all right. Everything is wrong. I just need to wake up. You've never once been awake in your entire life. Homeschool is brought to you by Wonder Peak Media. Written by Casey Giltner. Homeschool was read by me, Zoe Reed. Produced by Ava Provolo. Edited by Reed Barron. Music by Young Jun Kim. Artwork by Kim Jacobson.